I've just been to a conference and was reminded of all of this again, so it's been a good time just reflecting on it. It comes out of 2 Corinthians chapter 5. It says in verse 10, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due to us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. And then he goes on to say, since then we know what it is to fear the Lord, we try to persuade others. And so I think for us the big picture is we've been given this message of reconciliation, and we'll be judged for what we do with that message. And it goes on to say that in chapter 6, today is the day of salvation. Today is the day to do something with that message of grace that God has given us. And it's a day that won't last forever. It's only for now. And when Jesus comes back, it will be finished. That's kind of the big picture. I think for me too, the other verse that I've always had ringing in my ears is from 1 Corinthians 15, that this is a work that is never in vain, that it will last forever. So fear, but also verse 14 says Christ's love compels us. And so those two things. Anyway, that's the big picture, the gospel and being driven by what matters, what lasts. Come down a bit, and why the Central Coast, why planting? The Central Coast did have churches, but maybe not reaching the coast very well. And at that time, I think we're looking 20 years ago, at that time there was, Central Coast was the third fastest growing region in the whole of, I think, Australia. I was going to say New South Wales, but I think it was bigger than that. And then the coming in again closer to a reason, the Central Coast, fastest growing region, churches not reaching it, and it being a culture that we could relate to very easily, not have to learn a new language, connect very, very quickly to the kind of vibe of the culture here, made it a good choice for us. So all of that.
Yeah, great. And so what, at the beginning, what helped you get started?
We had friends who had, one of the reasons actually we thought to plant as well is we had friends that had been moving up to the coast, and when we'd meet up with them, they would often say, it's really hard to get a church here. There's not much around. No one seems to be doing evangelism work. And it was those friends that we contacted and invited to join us if they would like to. They sort of knew some other people too, and so what helped was just this small group of people that we knew about, that as we talked to agreed to give us a go, and we started to meet with them in a Bible study. The flip side was the church we were at in Sydney got very on board and put together some money to help us start, just give us a bit of funding to start with. And a young couple from that church just rocked up to us one day and said they couldn't bear to see us just go off and do it on our own, and they wanted to join us. And that was very impressive. It was actually Will and Leisha Awkward, and they both worked out he would give up his job and just work for the church, didn't care about money, and Leisha, his wife, would work out how to get work on the coast. And interesting, the work she got on the coast was with Scott PJ, who we didn't know at that stage, but Scott and Kim are now firm members of our church, and many of you know them. So yeah, it's interesting how God works. So Will and Leisha came up and gave us 2 years of their own. I don't know that we paid Will, I can't remember. That was a huge help. Yep.
Wow, what a blessing. And yeah, so what was roughly your numbers then? Like,
so when we first started in this Bible study group, it is hard to remember, but I think there was about 15 of us or 12 of us, and we met once a fortnight. One of the difficulties with that era was that we were still, Andrew's minister wanted him to finish off his year. He was running one of the churches, one of the the evening service and a whole lot of stuff, and he wanted Andrew to finish out that year. So we started meeting in a Bible study group in February, but for all of that year we were still basically working full-time in this other church. So it felt like we were church planting on the side. We met once a fortnight. The numbers started to grow from 15 as the year wore on, it became 30, about 30, and we began Sunday services, Sunday meetings in August. So February to August, it grew from 15 to about 30. We then did a public launch, and lots of people from our church in Sydney came, Gladesville, and that first week I think we had maybe 90 or 40 or 50. I keep forgetting the numbers, and Andrew's not here to correct me, so I could really say anything. Maybe 50 people were with us, and then we had lots of visitors that first week, as you do.
Great, thanks. So just backtracking a bit, so what were those days like? What were your feelings as you first started? You know, how many did you start with, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so those early days, so very different, driving up doing a Bible study to actually starting church. When we started church on Sundays in August, we were still living in Sydney. Quite a weird relationship now that I think about it. Driving up, running church, trying to meet people and hook people into church life, but ourselves living in Sydney. Finally, in October, we moved up, and in February, I began women's Bible study groups in the day, and we were starting night groups from October on for everyone, and sort of were becoming much more of the coast. Although, interestingly, from October to December, Andrew still had to drive back to Sydney and work at the church for a few days in Sydney. So it was this weird time. Those days were exciting, very full, very, very busy, and I think very difficult being divided between two works. Probably not a good, we wouldn't do that again if we could avoid it. In some ways too, I was reflecting ordinary too, because you wake up and you're just dealing with the things of the day. So I just hypothetically, so you rock up to the school and work out what rooms you're going to have, you work out who's going to help set up, and you're just tackling issues one by one to help you sort through things. So in many ways, every day is an ordinary day, and you're just looking at the next step. But take a step back, and when you're looking at the whole thing, we were kind of preparing ourselves for this long marathon, and it was exciting, but nervous at the same time, and this sense of really being in God's hands with no idea of how this is going to work out, no idea if it would work out. We did have in our minds we would give it 3 years, and then if nothing really happened, if the church didn't seem to get to the point where it could pay its own way, I think that was kind of our benchmark. If it couldn't pay its own way, we'd probably call it quits, maybe do lawn mowing, or I'd do school teaching or something. So we had very much this sense we're completely in God's hands, as we always are, but it was heightened, I think, in that feeling. No idea how it was going to work out, and you just take it day at a time, day by day. But exciting too, because what you're doing is of this immense value. You're bringing the word to the coast, and I just had a feeling of being this kid at the edge of this enormous sea, just dabbling my toes in. No idea where it's all going to go.
So when you first launched, you were into the school then?
Yes, we were. Yeah, I think we were able to borrow the common room, the staff room, and I think 6 months of that we outgrew the staff room, and then we had to move to the big basketball hall, which is horrible. And of course, we were this tiny little group in the corner, and rattled around. And we put the chairs in the corner so we didn't feel so lost in the big space. Yeah, and eventually we filled that and were able to start 2 services.
You mentioned that the other church you worked for before helped you with the finances. Was that just for the first year? And
yes.
Are you able to say how much it was, sort of to start?
Again, this is a memory thing. I think it could have been $30,000. And it was, I think of that passage where the Macedonian churches gave beyond their means. That's exactly what they did, because they actually went really behind themselves the following year, badly behind. And we had got to a position where we were meeting budget. Probably the only time in our whole history where we met budget was that first couple of years. And we were in a position to actually be able to give a gift back, not as much as they gave us, but we gave, I don't know, it might have been 15,000 back as a gift to them, to thank them. Yeah, and never again have we met budget in the same way. We're 100,000 behind this year. It's pretty scary.
Okay. Yeah. So, how did you feel about like the finances and starting with? Did you have a young family then? And
yeah. So when we started driving up to do the Bible studies, I was pregnant with our third one, and he was born in April, so right in that middle of that time. In fact, he was born one of the nights we had driven back from the Bible study. He was born later that night. So, and it's a bit of a blur for me actually remembering back to that time of raising a little one. And then we had Sophie just less than 2 years after that, which was a surprise, but a nice surprise. So a bit of a blur with young children, and obviously a lot of my time was needed just to keep that family going. Tell me your question again.
Just how did you find living on a small budget, and I guess did Andrew take care of that, or I don't with each I
didn't feel too nervous. We had enough to live on, and so I didn't feel too nervous, but it was very tight. And I remember when we moved into our house, I liked the house, but there was heaps that needed doing to it. And you know what? We're still trying to fix things that we walked in on and knew that we needed fixing. So 17 years later, we're nearly finished, but not quite. And I think if someone had told me back then, your house isn't going to be quite finished, you probably will never quite have the time and money to get it done quickly, I probably would have cried. So it's kind of glad I didn't know that. So we didn't have money to do those things. We're just basically living, but we did have enough to live, and take holidays and stuff.
Right.
Yeah. So
and did you
but money.
Sorry.
Yeah, you. I think I have wrestled a bit with not temptation, but just wishing I had more money over the years. And just then I think what helps me with that is just looking at the rest of the world and poverty, and then I realize again how rich I really am. So I think it is who you look to when you do worry about money and wish you had more. So I think that has helped me. But it's been I've had to talk to myself a lot about that, because I think I'm materialistic at heart and would like nicer things.
I think we're all a bit like that. And did you have family up there? Who were the friends you could talk to? When you had down times or
that's a good question. That was one of the hard things. So no and no and no. No friends, family back in Sydney, and so you are a bit like missionaries in that sort of context. And I did feel lonely, and one of the difficulties is people are coming to our church, I'm meeting people, I'm being warm, really putting myself out there, but at the same time, never sure who's going to stay, never sure what people are really thinking. And some people show it on their face. They're very cool and reserved with you because they are checking you out. Hard not to take that personally. And even some people who would act like your best friend, within a few months you wouldn't be there, and you'd find out they'd left and gone to another church. And I often used to think of that verse in John chapter 2, where it says Jesus would not entrust himself to the crowd. And that actually became, I used to feel, I started to realize I can't entrust myself to people, which is a weird thing. You sort of think you should trust people. What I think I worked out is I need to be warm to people. My role is to serve people, but I need to not be needing them, like relying on them and desperate for them. Just take what I get given, but not be in a position of needing them. And so work at letting God serve me. And I think too, your relationship with your husband becomes very important. And I think we have, I've really relied on Andrew and that
Yeah, I was
friendship.
just going to go on to ask you, like, how did that impact your marriage?
Yeah, marriage.
Go
Yeah. So
through.
I think um, this kind of stuff, your marriage has stress lines in it anyway, and usually you can't see them that much. They're just these thin lines, using a geological illustration. And this kind of church planning ministry is like this huge pressure underneath that kind of cracks them open, and they become these big fault lines, and things erupt. And it's not necessarily that it's directly related to church planting. It's just, we've all got baggage, and it's just that kind of pressure where you're not seeing much of each other, you're both busy and in your worlds and stressed. The small things can irritate. You're less patient, you're less restraining of yourself, and things that do hit your buttons, you're not holding back. So personally speaking, I'd flare up, and I'd had this tendency to think Andrew was being negative. Like if he would say something like, "What's in the dinner?" I would see that as this major criticism of what I'd cook. That's just a really small example of what I do, and that would blow up. And there's less self-control to sort of work through what he really might mean by that question. Yeah. So positively though, you're both in a work where you're sharing this, I think, more than say other situations of husbands and wives where he might go to the city, for instance, and do his job and come home at 7 at night, and you don't really know what he's doing and what his work is, and maybe you don't really care. Whereas this is very different because you're in a work that you both care about hugely, and you both want to work out, and you're for each other, helping each other make it happen. I think it's can have a very positive effect on your marriage. It throws you together, and I think too, for the wife to know that you can have this hugely influential, you can really impact your husband for good in this, is nice to know. It elevates your role. So knowing that, so your husband gets a lot of criticism. If I can be someone who shows him support, and I trust him, show him that I trust him, that gives him enormous courage to do a work that does take a lot of courage.
And so what about when, someone, particularly in the early days, I guess you might have rubbed some people up the wrong way, or other churches in the area, how did you cope with criticism either of Andrew, the church plant, or yourself?
Yeah. So a few different things. Criticism or conflicts and so on. I think I'm able mostly to not be too affected by it, and so am I right in saying that? I did. So for instance, people used to say, we're planning this church because Andrew's married a divorced lady and he can't get any work in Sydney, and so that's why he's come out here. That got sort of thrown around. I was really shocked to hear that, but it was so ridiculous that it didn't really impact me. It was just weird to know people were thinking stuff like this. I think I've got a healthy, look, that's where they're at, I can't do anything about it sort of view. Sometimes though I'm the kind of person that if I think someone's got the wrong idea, I feel like, I could just fix that up. I could just explain things and it would all be sorted and things would be good, and that's all it will take. But over the years, I've realized that people are actually a lot more complicated than that. And the thing that they say or the criticism they make is not necessarily what they're really thinking. It's just they're trying to find they've got feelings of dislike or hatred or criticism, and they put words together to justify their own feeling, but the thing that they talk about may not be where their real problem is, and so going to them and trying to sort out the problem is really not the point. They still want to have a feeling of hatred or dislike or criticism. So I've worked out that just logically going through some issue is not actually always the answer to dealing with stuff. I think you do get hurt. I think you do feel rejected at times, and you can feel quite flat with the work. And it's good sometimes just to go and have a swim and just refresh, clear your head and see, get perspective. Sometimes just go outside for a walk and just breathe in some fresh air, and I think get perspective again. The world is bigger than this person. The world is bigger than this issue that's going on. I think too, I've also realized that issues can sometimes move on, and so just to trust God, and in a month, in a year, that issue may not be there. So that's also, I guess, a helpful perspective thing. And just with criticism, knowing that probably our husbands are getting a lot of it, or feeling it, or even just there's an unspoken criticism if the work is not proceeding in the way they want it to. That can feel like a criticism. It's not a person, but just the work itself can actually be shouting at you in your own head. With all of that, I think it's really helpful to keep conveying trust and support. And so I guess it's actually helpful that we not be one of the ones criticizing. And just realize they're getting a lot of it, even in the work that's not going the way they want it to go. So let's not join in the chorus.
All right, before we go to questions, just last question, if there's time. How did your involvement change over time, like from having little ones and then? Yeah,
it's changed hugely. I've got children who can drive. 3 children can drive out of the 4, and they're not doing sport all afternoon. So whereas I think I was able to do some work in the church, some ministry work with the church in short snatches of time, now I can do it in large extended periods of time. And so I still safeguard periods of time in the day. Well, it's more at night now with the kids. I don't do night meetings very much at all. Whereas before I liked going out at night and doing lots of night meetings when the kids were little. So you do get more chance to do more things. Now with that though, I think comes a temptation. At the time where your children start to grow up, maybe you've been in church planting for quite some time, you could be quite sick of it by then, and you can feel like now's time to do my thing, or just get out there and do something different, and you can talk yourself into feeling like you need the break. I think I go back to I guess some of those verses that I was reading out from 2 Corinthians again. This is the only day of salvation. This is the work that lasts forever. And I've had to keep telling myself, don't stray off the path and do other things, which are still good things. I could easily become a teacher again. I'd get a lot of money, and it would be easy. My day would start and end, and I could go home and forget about it. I have to keep working hard to stick with doing church work and seeing the impact of that for eternity, and realizing when I get to heaven, that's when I can have a really big rest, do all the things I want to do, like surfing and watercolor painting and all this stuff that I don't let myself do now that I'm itching to do. I'm be able to do that then, and I'll be able to do it for eternity. So I do have to keep teaching myself that. So it's funny, at the time when I'm probably being released more and more from the intensity of bringing up children, is the same time that, although I could do more, I might be tempted to do less. Yes, I have to keep teaching myself so I don't fall into that.
Yeah. So in terms of all the good things that you can do in terms of ministry work, Carolyn asks, what do you think about spreading yourself too thin, like trying to run many things, multiple groups to get things started, life groups, women's groups, play groups? Or, did you just limit yourself to just a couple of things?
That's a great question. I think at the beginning you really do have to look at the resource you've got and the resource that you've got and your capacity. And I did limit it. I decided that the key thing that we needed to do in our church was, along with Andrew, like this isn't just me thinking on my own, but we wanted to mature people, because if you can raise the maturity level of people in your church, through study of the word, through people being in groups and studying the word. If you raise that maturity level, then what you're doing is creating the engine that can drive all the other ministries. And so although in the early days we had women that wanted to do craft, and you know, you could see good reasons. They said, oh, it'll be an outreach. I could just see it soaking up valuable leadership into something that would have very small return and wouldn't actually develop maturity to that study of the word develops maturity. Someone else wanted to start a play group in the community, but again, all the people they wanted to help them do it were the same people that really would make good growth group leaders. And so we had to do this kind of narrowing of focus, which I think some people got a bit annoyed about, and create this culture that study of the word is our first thing. Teaching kids, teaching adults the word is our first and foremost priority. And we just did that for many, many years before we branched out too much.
That's
and I think that was good. Like, I look back and I don't have any regrets. But now that the church is quite big, we can branch out a little bit, but still not much. And I still think that's good, because as people mature, they do their own work of good works. I've noticed people are fostering children. We've got people adopting children. We've got people doing soup kitchens of their own volition because they've been matured and they want to do that stuff. But we do have to keep doing the main thing in our church and encouraging people to keep that focus of, so life is our big thing, maturing in groups, life being our evangelism, maturing in groups is still our big thing. And I think it's been good.
Yeah, it's easy to get sidetracked, isn't it?
Yeah, with other good things, that's the problem.
Yes.
It's the good, better, and best that's the issue.
Yeah. So back in the days, like, so when you were feeling isolated, had no friends or family around, we've got Paul asking, well, how can you, like, how did Andrew help you, say, or how can a husband help their wife handle that isolation?
Yeah, look, there were lots of tears, and there were people would have parties, weddings, birthday parties, and not invite me, not invite my friends. That was the other thing that, not invite my kids. That was the other thing that hurt. I remember once this lady had put a birthday party for her child on the same time that our women's Bible study group was running, that she was in. And when I turned up to lead the group, there was only 2 of us left because she'd invited everyone else to this birthday party. It was just this terrible feeling. There were so many things wrong with that, like I couldn't even begin. And she was actually meant to be this mature Christian, and in some ways she really was. It was just weird. Anyway, how did we cope? That's the question. No, I don't. One of the things I have found is it doesn't last forever. Like, as you build history with people and serve with people more and more, and people do get converted and deepen, get more entrenched in the word and do mature, do appreciate the ministry that you're serving them with. As that grows and develops over the years, there are people that do become your firm friends. And I've got people I just love working with, love being with. I have deep love for people in our church. So that has grown. It didn't stay where it was. But in those early days, I don't know that it can be much different to that lonely feeling. Andrew and I loved our days off. I think it's good to work hard at your sex life and enjoy that intimacy with each other. Your kids are good too, because they take up lots of your energy and time, and they're people that you're loving. I think though you have there are different levels of friendship, and so it's not like I didn't have warmth and chatting with people, and I could have a coffee with a person. It's just that I may not know if they would be sticking around in a month or two. And I was meeting mums at school. I had coffee mornings with some mums at school. So you're making relationships and friendships at that sort of not superficial level, but lighter level. Yeah. But the deep ones of fellowship have just come with time. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and I guess over time the isolation, like you say, disappears, or slowly disappears as you make more friends.
Yeah, I think that's right. And different friendships. I don't think I've still got that real deep soulmate sole person that I can just talk to and spend time with, and partly that's because I'm too busy to. But I have lots of people that I'm working with, say with leading women's groups, all the leaders that I work with, I love them dearly, and because we are on mission together with the other women, serving them, we've got a real bond, a deep bond. But they're not particularly, some of them are not particularly people I love, I don't know, going surfing with, or that's a different kind of person, different kind of friendship. Yeah, so different friendships.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And so over the years, I guess you did allude to some of it in terms of when you started, you know, where was your primary contribution, I guess, to the church plant, and now, you know, can you sort of give us a rough sum up? There's a question from Joanne.
So I think it's good to, your husband and you are the leaders of the church, so I think it is good that you can lead in some way in the church amongst women. I think that is a little different to if you were going into an established church already and there's already lots of leadership. I think when it's just you two in a very small group, you are tended to be looked to as being leaders. So I took on leading Bible studies for women and training up women to do the same, and I had a year where someone was able to take that on and give me a break, but other than that I've had 17 years and haven't stopped, and I think that is the ministry I need to keep really investing time in. It's had a huge impact in our church amongst the women, and therefore amongst their families, and therefore in church. So I think it's been a key ministry that's been good, that I've kept in and probably need to keep keeping in. I refresh myself in it though by my role in it has changed. I think you need to refresh things. I think you can get stale, and just rethinking how to do things. But basically that's the work. The other thing I probably have naturally been drawn to is helping people get into ministry, recruiting people, working out what people are good at, seeing where the needs are in our church, and kind of matching those two things together. So I did a lot of that just ad hoc in the early years, and it's now become a more formalized ministry. And I now work under one of the guys in that as a team, and that's my role in the ministry team. I have a small team of women and men, and we interview people and help them get into the ministries in our church, and I really enjoy that. Kids, early days there was just me, so I did the kids, and not really well, but it got done. And when the right person came, I think it was after a year, 18 months or something, someone helped me in it, and then I moved out of it. But I'm back in it again this year because, for various reasons, I've needed to be drawn back into it this year. It's a very big work, and there was lots of gaps. Interesting, our church is big, but we have huge gaps everywhere, and so that never stops. That feeling of never having enough people never stops, and that can be tiring and deflating. It's something to always be learning to trust God for. And I do another thing called Chicks Brunch, where I'm helping older women meet with younger women, and then once a month I draw them into so there's one-on-one meetings going on everywhere. Once a month I draw them into a brunch where we do topics related to being a woman of God, and so we're trying to train up younger women to be godly older women one day. So quite a few things.
Right, thanks. So linking with, you said as a church, even though your church is much bigger now and you have brought in more staff, Renee asks, so as a senior pastor's wife, so would you see we have a special role in caring for other staff members' wives, or what might that look like?
Yeah. I think I'm not a good model in this one. In fact, this is what I've done. I've sort of seen every person that joins on staff as a comrade to fight alongside of me in the battle of church work and missioning and so on. Not as someone I'm facing front on to help them, but that's just been my image. I'm like, great, here are some people joining us in the work, not, oh, I've got to stop and help, turn around and look at them. So I'm facing outwards all the time. So that's meant, I think well, these are all assumptions. That's been my assumption. Then took me some time, but I realized some of the people joining our church expected that I would be this different kind of person. Some didn't, some did. So disappointment. For those that have been disappointed, what I think is eventually everyone's found their own friends. Quite a few of them just do work alongside of me, and it's been great. In fact, when I look at who are our women growth group leaders, nearly all the staff wives are in that role or in some high-level capacity somewhere. So everyone really has joined in. And I used to, I kept putting to different people, can you arrange, because it was another ministry I just couldn't take on, but can you arrange once a term that we all get together? And everyone that I've delegated the task to has really struggled with it. So we've probably done about 4 things in the whole 17 years. So it's terrible. So I don't know. So very unsuccessly, there you go. But we're all surviving. So I don't know what the answer is. There you go. Badly.
Well, one last question to wrap up. Carolyn wants to know, like when you mentioned back in the John 2 passage about Jesus not entrusting himself to them, do you think that as normal human beings that we need to be a bit more open and learn to let people into our lives, or else they won't trust us and open themselves up to us?
Yeah, it's good to clarify that, because it can sound like I'm meaning, you don't trust people, and I'm not meaning that. No, I definitely open up, definitely I share a lot of myself with people, and honest about my faults, about being a work in progress. I think that's a great modeling that we can do actually of the grace of God, is to be honest about our sin, honest about our struggles, let people into our homes when they are messy, let people, be aware that our kids are just very ordinary and not these beautiful, obedient, righteous saints. All of that's really helpful. So what I mean by it is just, I think not have that, I'm there to serve people, and so serve them in that way. I think in the early days I almost had this, maybe it was an unhealthy need of people, and just realize, no, I can't have people are not going to give me what I need, everything I need. Different friendships mean that you'll get something of what you need, but never all of it. And I think I've just learned, that's not what they're there for. I'm there to serve them and be open with them and get my sustenance and comfort and love from God. That's I just from my husband. Having said that, over the years, as I said, I've got people around me that but it's a bonus. It's that sense of loyalty, that sense of I'm with you, the sense of I appreciate what you do, Kathy, is just beautiful. It's a bonus though, and if you don't have it, I think you should still be able to be giving because of the love Christ has given us and the companionship that we get from our husband.
Yes, so I guess
hope that helps.
Yeah, I guess would you say then I guess your own private reading and praying has been a sustainer of that?
Very much. Yeah, for me, actually, it's interesting. It's not even just the private reading. I've struggled to do that well. But being in a Bible study group, even if I'm leading it, but sitting under the Word each week in church, preparing for the Bible study groups, and then the times I struggle through doing my own reading, being in conferences, all the times I'm in under the Word just nourish me, sustain me, refresh me. Going away, every time we go on holidays, I try and choose a couple of good books that will teach me theologically a little bit more about who Jesus is. Read a really good one, The Man Jesus Christ by Bruce Ware, W-A-R-E. Read that recently, just loved it. Refreshed me again in the depths of knowing who Jesus is. Those are the things, I think that do keep you going and make you able to be a giver to people. And so not be depending on them in order to sustain you and keep you going.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy, for your time and those thoughtful answers. And
it's been fun. Hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Hand back to Mark.
Well, thanks very much, guys. And Kathy, thanks from me for actually giving me so much to do over the last half hour. We've had questions rushing in from people. It's been very, very helpful. And I'd just like to say, firstly, to those people who we didn't get around to answering your questions, well, our apologies, and we hope that you'll join us for a webinar soon. We actually have more coming up in the coming month. I'll get to that in a moment. And for those people there was a few people who would have had a crash in audio experience at the beginning. My apologies for that, just a little technical issue on my end. But that said, we have more webinars coming up, and in fact the next one is going to be handled by Al Stewart. He'll be talking to Derek Hanna from Brisbane about knowing your city, about actually understanding a new culture as you go into it. How do you actually break into a new culture, one that you didn't grow up in? Kathy talked about how helpful it was that she and Andrew were familiar with beachside culture, having sort of started off in Manly themselves and then transferring to the Central Coast. That can be an advantage. But if you don't have that advantage, how do you understand your culture? So look forward to that on Thursday, the 19th of October. You have the opportunity then to sign up for that webinar straight after this one, in fact. And coming up this year, that we really want to plug this as best we can because we feel we've got a great lineup. Multiply, our premier conference for the year, is on from the 2nd to the 4th of December. You can register for that on our website now. It's going to be at Rooty Hill Anglican Church, or basically MBM Church as it's known to some people in Sydney, which is a fantastic opportunity to see how to develop a ministry, to a multicultural ministry, multicultural groups within your gambit, if you like, for the area that you've chosen. And we'll have Ed Stetzer there as well, an international missiologist who'll be able to talk to us about fundamental research that's now been done into Australian church planting, so to give us a real insight on what works and what doesn't in the Australian context. And of course, Andrew Heard will also be talking to us about the great planks of church planting, the theological things which undergird everything that we do. So we'd love you to come along to Multiply. We'd also like to see you at the next webinar. Now, just to finish off, we'd also like to thank our participants and thank those people who've been involved in making this possible. In particular, we'd like to thank EA Insurance, who are putting their support behind the planter sessions. EA helps out hundreds of Christian and community not-for-profits with their insurance needs. So if you've got insurance needs or questions that you just want to discuss with somebody, we'd encourage you to get along to ea.org.au because they have basically more insight on insurance and helping not-for-profits like church plans than we can offer. So we would like to point you to them. You'll also be receiving a survey at the end of this webinar, which will basically ask you 3 questions. You'll be done in under 2 minutes, I expect, just asking you how we can better improve this so that you get more of what you need from these webinars. And you'll receive an email tomorrow encouraging you to basically get along to the next event as well. Anything you can do to help us make this better is something that we actually value very much. So thank you very much for coming along to the latest planter session brought to you by Geneva Push. We hope that they will be very helpful. And if you've missed part of it, then don't worry, it'll be on our website in the coming week.